Tel Aviv is on fire. Not one district, not one neighborhood, the city. Iranian hypersonic missiles struck Tel Aviv in a sustained barrage that began before dawn and has not stopped. The Fatah-3, the weapon that Israeli air defense was never designed to stop. The weapon that travels at speeds that compress the intercept window to a fraction of what the civil defense model requires. The weapon that Iran had been holding in reserve and is now firing at Israel's largest city in numbers that the residual defensive architecture over Tel Aviv cannot begin to absorb. The fires those missiles started are still burning. The Israeli government has not said how many missiles were fired. It has not said how many got through. It has not said what the current status of Tel Aviv's emergency response infrastructure is, or whether it retains the capacity to manage what is burning simultaneously across multiple districts of a city of 4 million people. It has gone silent in the way it always goes silent when the gap between what it told its population to expect and what has actually happened is too wide to bridge with official language. And the gap this morning is the widest it has been since this conflict began. This is not a single strike that produced a single impact point the government can describe, frame, and manage. This is a city on fire, and Israel has nothing left to stop the missiles that are still coming. In the next few minutes, I will show you exactly what Iran fired, why the Fatah-3 hypersonic missile is the weapon that the entire Israeli defensive architecture was structurally unable to stop even before the attrition campaign depleted the interceptor stockpile, what the sustained barrage on Tel Aviv means for the 4 million people living in it, what the Israeli government knows about the current situation and is not saying, and why this morning's hypersonic barrage on Tel Aviv represents the moment every analyst watching this conflict understood was coming from the first Fatah-3 round that proved the defensive system could not reliably defeat it. Before we get into it, thanks for watching. Your support is what keeps this going, and I genuinely appreciate every one of you here. Make sure you are subscribed and like the video so more people can follow this. Now let's get into it. To understand why the hypersonic missile barrage on Tel Aviv this morning is categorically different from every previous strike on the city, you need to understand what the Fatah-3 actually is and why the word hypersonic is not a marketing description, but a technical specification that changes everything about how a defensive system has to perform to stop it. A ballistic missile follows a predictable arc. It launches, climbs to a peak altitude, and descends toward its target along a trajectory that the fire control systems of an air defense network can compute, predict, and generate an intercept solution against. The prediction window is not generous, but it is sufficient when the radar architecture is intact and the interceptor stockpile is available to generate the intercept geometry needed to defeat the incoming warhead before it reaches its target. The Fatah-3 does not follow that arc. It is a hypersonic glide vehicle. It launches on a ballistic trajectory to altitude and then transitions to a gliding flight profile that allows it to maneuver in ways that a purely ballistic re-entry vehicle cannot. It can alter its approach angle. It can adjust its terminal flight path. It can arrive at its target from a direction and at an altitude different from the direction and altitude the fire control solution generated during the earlier portion of its flight predicted it would arrive from. And it does all of that while traveling at speeds between Mach 8 and Mach 15, depending on the flight profile. At those speeds, the window between radar detection of the terminal approach and the moment of impact is measured in seconds, not the 90 seconds the Israeli civil defense model was built around, not the 60 seconds that degraded radar coverage had already compressed that window to. Seconds. The Arrow system was designed to defeat ballistic threats at high altitude during the predictable arc phase of their flight. It was not designed to track and engage a maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicle in terminal phase. David's Sling was designed to defeat medium and long-range ballistic missiles and large rockets. It was not designed to generate intercept solutions against targets moving at hypersonic speeds on unpredictable maneuvering terminal profiles. Iron Dome was designed to defeat short-range rockets and artillery shells. The Fatah-3 is not a short-range rocket. The layered system that Israel has spent decades and billions of dollars building is a layered system that was designed and optimized for the threat environment that existed before hypersonic glide vehicles became operationally deployed. The Fatah-3 is not that threatening. It is the threat environment that comes after it. And Iran is now firing it at Tel Aviv in a sustained barrage rather than as a single penetration round mixed into a larger conventional salvo. The implications of that shift from single Fatah-3 rounds used as penetration vehicles to a sustained Fatah-3 barrage as the primary strike package are the operational detail that explains why Tel Aviv is on fire this morning in a way that no previous strike has produced. Previous strikes on Tel Aviv used the Fatah-3 as the tip of the spear, 1 or 2 hypersonic rounds designed to defeat the upper-tier interceptors that would otherwise engage the larger conventional ballistic package following behind them. The hypersonic rounds cleared the path. The conventional rounds behind them exploited the cleared path. The defensive response could focus its residual capacity on the conventional portion of the salvo because the hypersonic rounds were already through. This morning's barrage reversed that logic. The Fatah-3 rounds were not the tip of the spear. They were the spear, a sustained sequential barrage of hypersonic glide vehicles fired at intervals specifically calculated to keep the defensive system in continuous engagement mode without the recovery window between impacts that a single strike followed by a pause allows. A defensive system that fires its remaining interceptors at the first Fatah-3 in the barrage has fewer interceptors available for the second, fewer still for the third. And by the time the barrage has been running for 40 minutes against a defensive stockpile that was already at its lowest level since this conflict began, the city that the system was protecting is no longer being protected by a system. It is being protected by whatever happens to be left, which this morning was not enough to stop what Iran was firing. Now let us talk about what a sustained hypersonic barrage on a city of 4 million people produces on the ground. Because the military analysis of the weapons system is inseparable from the human reality of what that weapons system is doing to Tel Aviv right now. Tel Aviv's emergency response infrastructure, its fire services, its ambulance networks, its hospital emergency departments has been operating under sustained pressure since the first uncontested strike weeks ago. Every previous strike added to the load on that infrastructure without removing its capacity to function. The infrastructure bent. It did not break. A sustained hypersonic barrage that produces multiple simultaneous impact points across different districts of the city at intervals short enough to prevent emergency services from completing response to one impact before the next one arrives is not a load that bends emergency infrastructure. It is a load that breaks it. The fire services responding to fires in the northern district cannot simultaneously respond to fires in the central district when the interval between those strikes is shorter than the transit time between them. The hospital emergency departments receiving casualties from the first wave of impacts are receiving casualties from the second wave before they have stabilized the first. The civil defense coordination that routes emergency resources to impact points in order of severity cannot maintain that coordination when new impact points are being generated faster than the coordination system can process them. That is the operational condition that Tel Aviv's emergency infrastructure is managing right now. Not a single strike with a defined casualty and damage picture, but a sustained barrage with an accumulating casualty and damage picture that is outrunning the city's capacity to respond to it. The Israeli government's silence about the current status of Tel Aviv's emergency response capacity is not operational security. It is the silence of a government that knows the honest answer to the question of whether Tel Aviv's emergency infrastructure is coping, describes a situation its civilian population is not prepared to hear. The 4 million people living in Tel Aviv were told throughout this conflict that the system would protect them. They were told the layered defense was the best in the world. They were told that even as the interceptor stockpile was depleted, even as the radar architecture was degraded, even as the warning timelines shortened below the threshold the civil defense model required, the system retained the capacity to provide meaningful protection. This morning's hypersonic barrage is the answer to every one of those assurances, and the government that made those assurances has nothing to say. The strategic consequences of a sustained hypersonic barrage on Tel Aviv extend beyond the immediate damage picture into the political and military dimensions of this conflict that the barrage has now fundamentally altered. Netanyahu is managing the most politically impossible domestic situation of this entire conflict. The corruption trial, the rejected pardon, the deteriorating poll numbers, the American withdrawal from every regional base, the Ben Gurion closure, the Dimona strikes, the nuclear-capable missile whose warhead contents were never confirmed, and now a sustained hypersonic barrage on Tel Aviv that the defensive system he has been publicly defending as adequate has demonstrably failed to stop. Each of those events was survivable for a government with Netanyahu's political skills. The hypersonic barrage is different in the specific way that makes it the hardest event yet to survive politically, because every previous defensive failure could be framed as the result of extraordinary circumstances. Interceptor depletion produced by an unprecedented sustained campaign. A nuclear facility strike that exploited a specific defensive gap. A dual city strike that exceeded the combined capacity of a system already under extreme attrition pressure. Each failure had a specific technical explanation that a government with communication skills could deploy to manage the narrative. A sustained hypersonic barrage that sets Tel Aviv on fire has no technical explanation that changes what every Israeli watching the fires can see. The city is burning, the missiles are still coming, and Israel has nothing left to stop them. Those three facts require no analytical framework to understand. They are visible from the rooftops of every building in Tel Aviv that is not itself on fire. The American response to the Tel Aviv hypersonic barrage is being shaped by the same withdrawal dynamic that the base strikes produced, and that has removed the forward military presence that previously gave Washington direct leverage over the conflict's operational tempo. American forces are no longer in the region, in the numbers, and at the locations that made a rapid response to an escalation event operationally straightforward. The bounded escalation parameters that governed American involvement before the withdrawal were calibrated to a presence that no longer exists at its previous scale. And the administration that is watching Tel Aviv burn on the same morning, it is managing the political fallout of a forced military withdrawal from every regional base, is an administration that has run out of the space it needs to maintain the domestic narrative that this campaign has been conducted within acceptable parameters. The open question that a sustained hypersonic barrage on Tel Aviv leaves hanging over this conflict and over every government watching it is the same question the entire series of escalations since February 28th has been building toward. At what point does a government that has watched its largest city set on fire by hypersonic missiles cannot stop acknowledging publicly that the military campaign it started on February 28th cannot achieve the objectives it defined as victory on day one? Not the military question of whether the campaign should continue. The political question of whether a government that told its population the system would protect them and has watched that system fail to stop a sustained hypersonic barrage on 4 million people can continue to govern on the terms it has been governing on. That question does not have a comfortable answer. And the fires still burning across Tel Aviv this morning are the most visible demonstration yet that the government managing this conflict has run out of time to avoid answering it. Iran has set Tel Aviv on fire with hypersonic missiles. Israel has nothing left to stop them. And the government that spent 4 weeks telling its population otherwise is silent. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you being here. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If Iran's decision to fire the Fatah 3, not as a penetration vehicle mixed into a conventional salvo, but as the primary strike package in a sustained sequential barrage, was specifically designed to keep Tel Aviv's residual defensive system in continuous engagement mode until its remaining interceptor capacity was exhausted. What does the shift from using hypersonic missiles as a tip-of-the-spear penetration tool to using them as the sustained barrage itself tell you about what Iran calculated the defensive stockpile level over Tel Aviv was before it fired the first round this morning? And at what point does a government watching its largest city burn under a hypersonic barrage, it cannot stop having an obligation to tell its 4 million civilians that the assurances it made about the system's protective capacity were wrong? Let me know below. Subscribe and like the video if you want to stay updated on this. And click the video on screen to see another one. I will see you soon.